Hey guys, in this video we're going to be tooling from volume 1 of the leather tooling pattern book. We're going to open that up, and the first full tooled example you come to is this belt here on the left hand side, and that's the pattern we're going to be tooling up today. If you already have this book and that pattern, want to tool along with me, outstanding. If you don't have it but want to get it, I'll leave the link in the description for you. And if you don't have it and don't want to get it, I hope you stick around and find out some really fun tips as we move along through these tools. Now, I already have my pattern transferred over to my leather. We're going to be tooling on 8/9 ounce Herman oak leather, and I've already taped the back of that to prevent stretching while we're tooling there. And the tools that we're using, all these tools are going to be found in our beginner's kit, and we will link that up as well. But you can tool with any tools that you have. It doesn't have to be a specific knife or things like that. We're going to talk about different options as we move along, but I wanted to show you how we can tool through these patterns with even beginner level tools. So as we're pulling these cuts, notice anywhere there's a point and those tips, I'm not connecting that cut. We're going to connect with the bevel later on, but I don't want to connect that and create a weak spot in my leather. Now right here where you have these fold overs, I want you to pull that inside cut close to our outside where it fades down just next to it, not to where it would continue and run perpendicular and run into that. There's a lot of longer cuts in this pattern too as we pull these down. It's important that I'm kind of locking my hand, fading that cut out as we go. You can see how I just lighten off our pressure. Now here's another one of this turn back. So that turn back, I'm going to start in there close to the outside line. Bring that around. Now follow my really long sweeping line down there. Okay, it's important to get nice smooth cuts. Just rolling along. Now on this little stump here, when you get to that, notice I didn't really fade that line out much because we're going to use another tool in there later on and bring our mule's foot and put a little stop behind that. Same thing with that short guy there. There's another one of these little short ones that we're going to put a stop and get our mule's foot into later on. Now these lines that go underneath here, I'm going to keep that same trajectory with my hand, that same path, and then pick that line up right here where it comes out. You want that eye to be able to follow that line all the way through there. Same thing here. Pick it up right there. Fade those lines out. Another short stop there that we'll put our mule's foot into. And notice these lines, I'm pulling them all from the direction that they're growing. So that vine's growing that direction, so I'm pulling from those points back here, and that's going to help me fade those in the right direction. Now, I've kind of skipped over this section here and continued down. Now, why would I do that? Well, because we have this little portion of the vine that's growing in this direction, so I'm going to pull those cuts back that way. Now this pattern kind of just ends right here and those lines stop, That's designed for a repeating belt pattern. So you could take that pattern and run this line right into the end of those, transfer again, and that pattern would continue on there. Now if you're getting down to the end on something, or you want to start place and need to cap that off, we can just bring these lines together down here. And we can have it just start right from there and grow. All right, I'm going to rotate this around, and we're going to catch a little tip here. You can see this is coming underneath, so it's going to come there. Roll right around. And again, we've kind of jumped in on this pattern. My leather's already cased. The tape's on the back, and I transferred that pattern. Again, if you want to get into details on those, we have the videos on those specific skills as they kind of pertain to every pattern that we're going to do. So be sure and check those out if you have any questions on that. First tool that we're going to be stamping into here is our large bevel. So if you're looking at the one in the kit, it's PB013 is your numbers on there. I'm going to start out here on the tip, making sure I'm keeping that bevel straight up and down. I don't want to be tipping back to me or forward away like that. I always want to keep things positioned where I can see this flat end right in that line. Now every time I'm hitting that maul, I'm moving that bevel slightly over to the side. And that's what's going to get us that nice smooth bevel line. And the goal is that we're beveling that one time and not having to go back and re-bevel that and smooth lines up. So if we can get a smooth bevel that first time, that's what we're after. Now, which side of the line to bevel on can be a big question in here. That seems to be the biggest question with a lot of beginners in every pattern that they're tooling is, I don't know, it just looks like a bunch of lines. Well, I understand that, and let's look at one way to figure this out. Now, there's lots of different theories on this, but we're going to start with some simple practices. Now, one, if all we have is a pattern like this where there's no hard cut border line, this floral work or that vine work actually creates its own border, right? So we can start on the outside. We want the floral to stand up, or the vine work to stand up, so we're beveling out away from that, shadowing away. Now we can just go around here, and every line that's on the outside, so everything that's touching that border, we bevel out away. So I come to this next line, bevel out away from it. But now it continues into the pattern here, right into that vine work. But once I start on a line in one direction, I continue on that line. That makes sense? That one runs into something, so it stops. Come out to this next line on the border. It continues in here, so I just continue that on. Another one that continues in. Big long outside one. If you're watching and can tell, this line continues underneath that one and picks up here. But for right now, we'll just pretend that we don't see that, and we'll stop right where that intersects there. This one here, again, this continues in the pattern, so we're going to roll right around here. Now any line that we faded with our cuts there, we're wanting to fade out with that bevel as well. And we fade out with our bevel just by lightening up the pressure that you're tapping with. Alright, so we're going to continue around this pattern. Let's catch all the lines that are touching the border. Remember to continue those all the way into the pattern. Once you start on a line in one direction, continue on that line. Alright, bevel around these edges and come back. Now with those outside ones done, we can start looking at what this pattern actually is and break it down. It's going to make sense for where to bevel the rest. So if we look at this one main vine that comes through here, we come in this direction, it's flowing here, and flowing out that way. You can follow that flow. Now of that, we have this dominant stem that's going to come up, and then things fall out from there. They stagger out, right? You can see it happening here. This main line here, and then we bevel out because things are staggering out. So when we look at that, starting at this end, you have this main space filler here that's coming around. That's creating our dominant stem coming down. And you see that we've already gotten into that pattern a little bit from right here, this border line there, went in that way. So that main one comes down until it runs underneath this next big space filler. And that one comes down till it runs into this next big space filler. Runs down through here. Now this one reverse spot in the whole pattern, you have one spot that reverses here, this one little swirl that's coming and wrapping around both directions there. We have every line on that beveled except for that inside one. So that one's going to bevel inside here because it's coming over top of this vine that's coming in there. So as we look at this, we already have that outside line, so now we can come to the inside. We'll bevel down this direction. And then these little sticker vines that come up, we just come and bevel those out towards that little background spot. Same thing, we have a little background spot here. This is the outside of this main space filler here that's coming up. So this line will bevel down this direction. So this piece here stands on top. Come to the inside of that, bevels out that direction. Come up to this little sticker vine here and we'll bevel in towards that background. So looking at that and seeing which way those go, now we can start down finishing out beveling these out. We'll walk along with you here. We're going to cap this one off. That'll cap towards that background spot. I'm just going to go down and everything I can hit from this direction. Here's this little vine that kicks out and rolls underneath itself. We need to get the inside of that done. We've created a little background spot in there. Come down here, this big space filler here, the inside of this vine. Fades off. This space filler here, we can catch that long outside line of that as well. We have this sticker vine that comes up, we can cap off. And then we just talked about this a minute ago, the inside of this one swirl here. This main vine, that main vine's coming down, so we can bevel up away this direction. And that's going to stagger out from there. Now I can turn this pattern around and we'll catch the rest of the lines that we haven't gotten yet. When we look to shade, I'm going to be using the vertical line thumbprint. This is PT057. This is the large vertical line thumbprint. We're going to start by, we have 3 spots where these vines turn back and fold back, and we're looking at the back side. So right down here at the end of the pattern, I'm going to use the small end of that thumbprint, and we'll get it right up next to that line that it turns over. I keep that tool tipped just a little bit so we're not mashing down the whole vine. We just want that shading right up next to that line that turns over. We can start creating that depth that way. Now moving up to the other end of our pattern, I have one more little vine on the outside that turns over like that. Same thing, get that shading right up underneath there. And then that big stump at the end folds over itself. And I start fading that shading down the vine as I go. Now let's start looking from this direction. We'll work our way back. Which spots can we shade as we go here? So anywhere that's a little sticker vine, this guy that sticks out here, this little one here, right there, you're starting to see what those look like. We're going to be looking at the shorter, rounded part of that vine, tipping that tool slightly. I don't want to tip too much and we'll gouge that edge in there and start creating a chatter mark, but just tipping it enough that it's not laying flat. Work up and create that little highlighted ridge right around that little rounded spot. And now I'm going to flatten that tool even more and just fade slightly down this vine and soften that back edge. Same thing, I'm going to look at the rounded spot on this big stump. Slightly fade that, but I just wanted to get a little bit of shading right up here towards the tip of that. Now it kind of gets concave here and then a little bit rounded right in here, so I'm going to put a little bit of shading right there. And then fade that off where it concaves at. And we're starting to get a whole lot more depth added in there. Rotate this slightly. We see a sticker vine on the inside here. Now that vine goes underneath that stump, so I want that shading to come all the way up under there like that. Now we'll fade that off, creating that highlighted ridge on the rounded spot of that sticker vine. Tipping it just enough to get the back side of this up out of the leather, but not so much that I'm creating chatter marks with the front side that we're shading with. Now, this little stump in here, same thing, I'm going to go the rounded portion of it. Fade in a little bit of shading there. We have a concave edge and then that rounded edge. You'll start seeing this pattern. I'm shading where those shorter rounded edges are. And this tool is always pointing and pulling back down that vine work, the direction that it's growing from. That rounded edge there that we put some shading on. Now we don't have to shade way far down those vines. The point behind it, the idea that we're trying to do is create depth. Right? We have a flat piece of leather that we're trying to create the appearance of a lot of depth through these vines. If we are adding dimension by adding some of this shading. If I just shade it all and push it all down, we haven't really added dimension, we just changed the dimension of everything and pushed it all down to that lower level, right? So as important as it is to get some shading in there, it's important to fade that off and have some leather that's not shaded as well. Okay, now this little swirl here, I'm not putting any shading in that one. We'll come back with another tool on that swirl, give it a little more character as we go. Get a little bit of shading just up around that edge of that one that folds over there. Now I'm going to turn this around so I can see better, but we'll get a little bit of shading on that outside one here as well. Not a lot, but just a little bit out there. Our first detail tool we're going to use is a Mules Foot. It's a little tool, looks like a V down at the end of that. The number on that tool is a U858. May have a different size. They're all going to be pretty similar though. When we're using a Mules Foot in a spot here where we stop at the end of a vine, I'm going to tip that and we're going to have the point going down the vine. I want to tip to where the open spot is almost holding that stopping point, and we're creating that little wrinkle in here. I'm going to keep my direction following the flow of that vine, and I'm anchoring my fingers down here so it's easy to step that around and not lose track of where you're at. We have 2 or 3 spots there and then one on this other side. Again, when I use that Mules Foot, I want to tip that up so it's not a full impression. Hit it down deep to start with, and then we'll fade that off in the pressure that we're putting down as we follow that curve around there. The last detail tool for this pattern before we get to our backgrounds is going to be a veiner. This is a narrow tool here. The number on this one out of the kit, this one is a PV030. I'm going to use this around that swirl. Now the curve of the tool I'm going to have lined up with the curve of that swirl. I'm going to start on this outside edge where that comes and fades off. I'm tipping this tool. I don't want this one flat. I don't want the whole impression. I'm going to tip that tool back. We're going to start out light. And I'm going to pick up pressure as I go around here, and I'm also starting to flatten that tool a little bit. I want that impression to get a little bit larger as we roll around here, and then we'll fade it off again as we get to the end of that swirl. Now for an aiming point, I'm aiming for the impression to point towards the center of this swirl. So that's why as I go around here, you can see me rotating that tool. That's going to help the flow of that and help your eye follow that around there. When we look to backgrounds, we're going to bar ground this one. So you have 2 bar grounders for the kit tools, a large and a small. That's just a matter of how many dots are in the tool. Now there's some smaller background spots in this pattern, so I'm going to be using the small one for the majority of this. And in each background spot, I want to keep the direction of the tool going the same way, or at least fanning that. I don't want to start it one way and then turn to fill spots. So I'm going to start this one up here, and notice I kind of rotate as we go. Now we're going to get a little bit of an overlap with that tool. Ideally we don't have a ton of overlap. We're moving over just enough for those dots to sit next to each other and not be mashed in there. But as long as we're being smooth with it, looking at the direction that they're going, even if you do have a little overlap, as you're learning, not a big deal. So I'm rotating that until it fills that spot, and I kind of rotate and fan it back out a little bit to finish that off. Again, in this pattern, all these background spots are pretty small slivers right through the middle of these vines. Some of the other patterns we talk about stacking these backgrounds to fill bigger spaces, but this pattern here is not necessary. Now a background spot is going to have all the edges beveled down towards it. So this last one here, you can see there's a little spot and both sides of that are beveling down towards the background. So if you're going to background something and notice that there's an edge, if I was trying to background right here, there's an edge that's beveled away, you know you're in the wrong spot. So those are our spots that are fully backgrounded. Now if you want to fill in a little bit on the edge, in some of these spaces here that look like they could be backgrounds but there's nothing closing those off, I'm going to show you how to do that. Tip this around. I'm going to use my large bar grounder, but I'm going to tip that back. See how that fades a little bit of background out away from there? I'll do that in one more spot here. Again, fading that away from there. Now our last step here is going to be the decorative cuts. So we're back to our swivel knife. Now I'm going to pull these cuts, again pulling them down my vines just like when we started our initial cuts. But anywhere we put shading at, there's a good chance we're going to put some decorative cuts. Our cuts are always going to have some curve to them. They're going to start deeper and fade lighter. So here in this big stump, I'm going to aim up here. We're going to start where that concave area is. And I'm going to pull a longer cut around here, fading that out. Now this concave, or this line that creates that concave curve there, I'm going to kind of mimic that with a decorative cut on the inside. Fade a couple smaller cuts. Down here where this folds over itself, we're going to do something different on this just to show you a different option. There's, in the book, I think we have just a couple cuts in there, which you can do. I'll also show you how I'm going to lighten those cuts up in one direction, and we'll come the other direction, create a little bit of a crosshatch in there of real light cuts. That's going to help add a little bit of texture and stand that apart as the bottom side of that where it folds over. Now a lot of these sticker vines here, we're going to have a little shorter cut around that curve and then a longer cut down the vine. Shorter cut and a longer cut. Again, it's curved with some shading here. It's a little bit longer, so I'm going to stack in a few cuts and then pull a longer one down there. Again, main thing is we have some curve to those cuts. We're starting them deep, fading them off light, and they're adding flow. So we're wanting that cut to pull around the direction we want that eye to go for following that vine around there. If we have a little bit of space, we can stack a couple shorter cuts and then pull a longer one around there. There's no one right way to do decorative cuts, but This just shows you an example and an idea of some real simple 2 and 3 cuts in each spot that can help add to this pattern. Again, we skipped that section that's going the other way because I'm going to turn this around to be able to get those cuts. So we want to pull back down the vine work. Last in that swirl, stack a couple on the outside, and pull a big longer one down the center of that. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this and been able to pick up a couple tips. Follow along as we tool through all the patterns in our tooling books.